Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are doing something a little bit different.
Yeah, a bit of a pivot from our usual stuff.
Right, because usually when we talk about Harry Potter on here, it's, as a celebration, we were talking about the nostalgia of it all, breaking down the magic system, or maybe just ranking the books again.
Always a contentious topic, ranking the books.
Oh, always. But today we are actually looking forward. We are turning our attention to the horizon, to what honestly should be the biggest entertainment event of the decade.
Yeah, the upcoming HBO Max Harry Potter television series.
Exactly. And it's arguably the biggest intellectual property swing we have seen in a long, long time.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, you are taking a beloved series, arguably the most beloved series of the modern era, and you're just rebooting it. The potential there is, frankly, limitless.
7 seasons, high budget, that whole HBO prestige TV treatment.
Right, but the risk is just astronomical.
And that is exactly where we are aiming our lens today.
Yeah.
We aren't just sitting here looking at the glossy press releases or the teaser trailers. We are breaking down a very specific and, frankly, deeply concerned critique.
Yeah, this comes from the YouTube channel Nerdrotic.
Right. Specifically a video titled, "Is the Harry Potter Show Cooked More Bad?"
Which is quite the title.
It is. Now, I know that sounds a bit inflammatory right out of the gate. Cooked is, internet slang for done for, ruined, over before it even began.
It is definitely hyperbolic. But the mission for this deep dive isn't to just gossip about rumors or lean into rage bait. We want to unpack a very specific argument the source makes about something called pattern recognition in Hollywood.
Pattern recognition.
Exactly. The source isn't just saying, hey, I have a bad feeling about this show. They are actively arguing that there is a distinct, observable cycle of failure that modern adaptations go through right now.
And that Harry Potter, this absolute cultural juggernaut, is basically ticking every single box on that checklist.
Right.
And before you tune out thinking, oh, this is just more negative internet, let's remember what is actually at stake here. The source describes Harry Potter as the Star Wars for millennials.
Which is a really apt comparison, honestly.
It is, because this isn't just a story. It's a childhood memory for millions of people. For a lot of people tuning in, this might have been the very first book you ever fell in love with.
The midnight release parties at bookstores, the costumes, the whole identity of figuring out if you're a Gryffindor or a Slytherin.
Or a Hufflepuff.
Exactly, Hufflepuff pride. But seriously, it's billions of dollars in theme parks, merchandise, and a legacy that has survived for 2 decades.
So the question we are exploring today is that legacy about to hit a massive iceberg? And more importantly, can we see the iceberg coming?
Which brings us right into this concept of pattern recognition.
Right, let's get into that. Because usually when a studio announces a remake of something this massive, the general assumption is, well, they're spending $1 billion, so it has to be good. They wouldn't mess up Harry Potter.
You would think so, right? But the source argues that is the exact wrong assumption to make in the current Hollywood climate.
Why is that?
The core theory here is that Hollywood has, in a way, either forgotten how to adapt beloved properties, or rather, they have adopted this entirely new strategy that, according to the source, inevitably leads to failure.
So there's a formula.
Yes, the source argues that if you look at the last few years of major franchise reboots or adaptations, they literally all follow the exact same steps. It's like a recipe for disaster.
Okay, let's walk through this recipe then, step by step. Where does the cycle begin?
It starts with step 1, which is simply the announcement. This is the honeymoon phase.
Which is usually the happy part. I mean, I remember when the HBO news dropped, my phone just blew up with texts. People were saying, did you see 7 seasons? They can finally include everything the movies left out.
Exactly. That is the natural reaction. The IP is announced. Fans feel a lot of excitement, or at least a cautious optimism. They want it to be good.
They project all their hopes onto this blank slate.
Right. They think, finally, we'll get Peeves the Poltergeist. We'll get the full backstory of the Marauders.
But then reality sets in.
Yeah, enter step 2, which is the hiring. The source points out that this is where the very first cracks start.
How so?
Well, studios tend to hire showrunners, writers, or directors who often have zero experience in the specific genre of the IP, or they have really questionable track records on previous projects.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. People can learn. Right. I mean, everyone has to start somewhere. Just because a writer hasn't done a massive high fantasy epic before doesn't mean they can't write a good script. Maybe they bring a fresh perspective.
That is the charitable view, for sure. And historically, that might have been true. But the source argues this is where the red flags really start, primarily because of who is being hired and their past public statements.
Statements about the fans.
Sometimes, yes. Often it's people who are openly antagonistic toward the existing fan base or the genre itself. But they don't always show that right away, because right after they get hired,
which is
the fan claim.
Oh, I know this one.
You've seen this a dozen times. The creators immediately go on a massive press tour claiming they have always loved the books.
Right. I'm the biggest fan. I grew up reading these under the covers with a flashlight.
Exactly. It's a literal script.
It does feel like a prerequisite for the job interview at this point.
Yeah.
Just tell the executives how much you love the product.
But the source argues it's very often a lie, or at least a massive exaggeration. And it's designed specifically to lower the defenses of the core audience.
Because if they admit up front, hey, I don't really care about this wizard stuff, I just want to tell my own unrelated story.
The fans would revolt immediately, so they fake the fan.
Okay, so they get through the door, they have the job, they've convinced us they are one of us. Then what happens?
Then comes step 4, which the source calls the shift. This is the pivot, the bait and... Those exact same creators who just spent months saying they loved the original material start announcing that they will actually be doing things their own way. You start hearing very specific, very loaded phrases in interviews.
Like what kind of phrases?
Phrases like, the source material is dated, or we need to reflect the world we live in today. And the really big one, we need to update it for a modern audience.
And the modern audience update. Man, I see that phrase everywhere now. But hold on, isn't that just normal? I mean, the world is different than it was in the late 90s when the first book came out. Shouldn't art reflect the time it's made in?
That is the trap, according to the video. The source argues that modern audience is actually Hollywood code.
Code for what?
In this context, it doesn't just mean people watching television in 2026.
Yeah.
It's a dog whistle for a very specific type of structure. It basically means taking the moral framework, the political sensibilities, and the social dynamics of the current year and forcefully overlaying them onto a story that was written in a completely different context.
So it's basically presentism, judging the past, or in this case, a fictional fantasy world, by very strict current real-world standards.
Correct. And the source points out that when a showrunner says, the source material is problematic, what they're really communicating is, I am morally superior to the original author.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not about adaptation anymore at that point. It's about correction. They aren't trying to faithfully translate Harry Potter to the screen. They are actively trying to fix J.K. Rowling.
That does sound remarkably arrogant when you put it in those terms. You are adapting the single best-selling book series in the history of the world. Maybe you assume the book is right, and you are wrong.
One would certainly think so. But that arrogance leads directly into step 5, the red flag parade.
The red flag parade. I like that term.
This is usually where casting decisions or plot changes are announced that suggest a complete lack of respect for the source material, what the source describes as actively subverting the original work.
And we're going to get into the specific casting rumors for the Potter show a bit later, because that is a massive segment on its own.
We definitely will. But sticking to the cycle for a moment, this controversial casting or plot announcement inevitably triggers step 6.
The backlash.
Exactly, the backlash. Fans voice concern. They go online and say, hey, that actor doesn't look anything like the character described in the book, or, hey, that completely breaks the established lore of...
And how does the studio usually respond? Do they engage with the fans? Do they try to explain their artistic vision calmly?
Usually, absolutely not. They attack.
Right.
They label those complaining fans as a vocal minority. They call them trolls or bigots or toxic. It instantly becomes this intensely adversarial relationship. The creators start actively fighting the audience on...
Which is just a bold marketing strategy. Insult the customer until they agree to buy the product?
Yeah, it rarely works out for them. Which leads us to the final stage, step 7, release and failure.
The end of the line.
The product is finally... It fails to resonate with the core audience because, well, you spent the last year alienating them.
And the general audience doesn't show up either.
Right, because the word of mouth online is utterly toxic. And it turns out that so-called vocal minority was actually the majority of the paying consumer base. The show gets canceled or the ratings absolutely crater, and everyone at the studio looks around in confusion and asks, what happened?
The source lists a pretty damning evidence locker to back this up, don't they? It's not just one or two isolated shows.
Oh, it's a graveyard of franchises. The source cites Velma, for instance, which was almost universally reviled by fans of...
Velma was brutal.
Then there's Willow, which was removed from Disney Plus entirely. It was received so poorly.
They just erased it.
Completely. The source also brings up The Witcher, which is the prime example of writers who allegedly actively disliked the books they were adapting, leading to the lead actor walking away.
Right, Henry Cavill left.
Then you have The Wheel of Time, Ironheart, The Marvels, The Acolyte, and essentially the entire current state of Star Wars generally. Oh, and Doctor Who and Star Trek, specifically what they call Kurtzman Trek.
And Rings of Power is on that list too, right?
Yeah.
That feels like the closest direct comparison to Potter. Huge budget, massive legacy fantasy IP, and it just completely divided everyone.
It really did, and the source argues that Rings of Power followed this exact 7-step psych letter. They fired the established Tolkien scholars early on. They claimed they were fixing Tolkien's perceived lack of diversity. They went on the offensive against the fans.
Yeah, the results.
A show that, according to the source, completely failed to capture the cultural zeitgeist despite costing literally $1 billion to make.
It really is a pattern. Just rinse and repeat. And the core fear here is that Harry Potter is currently sitting somewhere right between step 4 and step 5 of this exact cycle.
Exactly. We are well past the announcement. We are into the hiring phase. We are already hearing the modern audience comments from the writers, and we are just now starting the casting rumors leak out.
Okay, let's pause on the cycle itself for a second and talk about why Harry Potter specifically is such a risky target for this kind of deconstruction. Because you could easily argue, hey, it's Harry Potter. It's too big to fail. I mean, I'll watch the first episode just out of pure curiosity. Won't everyone?
The source actually addresses that exact too big to fail argument. They acknowledge that Harry Potter is indeed the defining story for an entire generation of millennials.
The books matured right alongside the...
Exactly. We are talking about 600 million copies of the book sold worldwide. The original movies grossed $7.7 billion at the box. This was the ultimate success story of the...
And the brand itself is remarkably resilient. It's taken some pretty heavy hits, kept going.
It has. The source points out that the brand has survived the Fantastic Beasts which frankly stumbled really hard at the end there. I don't think anyone is clamoring for a fourth Fantastic right now.
No, absolutely not. That franchise kind of just fizzled out into nothing.
It also survived The Cursed Child. Now, the source claims most hardcore fans actively hate the script of Cursed Child.
All the time travel stuff.
Yeah, it breaks established time travel rules. The characterization of Harry as a father is really weird to a lot of people. Yet, despite all that, people still pack the theaters every single night because they just want to see the magic effects on stage.
And then there is the massive elephant in the room, the J.K. Rowling controversy.
Which is obviously a massive topic, but we need to stick to what the source argues here. They argue that those controversies, primarily regarding her views on gender, are really only controversial within very...
Hollywood and Twitter.
Right, the Hollywood and UK entertainment epicenters. The source argues that with the vast majority of humanity, the normal, everyday people just buying books for their kids at Target, it's largely a non...
They make a pretty strong point there when you look at the recent video game.
Yeah.
I remember the boycott of Hogwarts Legacy. It was everywhere online.
Exactly. That is the source's Exhibit A for this argument. There was a massive, highly organized campaign online to boycott that. If you streamed it, you were labeled a bad person. Streamers were getting actively harassed.
And what was the actual result of all that noise?
It was the best-selling game of the entire year.
It crushed everything else.
It beat Call of Duty. That proved, according to the source, that the Twitter bubble is not real. The brand is essentially bulletproof, provided you give the fans what they actually want, which is an immersive, faithful, wizarding world.
So if the brand is that bulletproof, why is the source so incredibly worried about this new HBO TV show?
Because a TV show run by Hollywood writers is a very different than the game was a huge success because it just allowed you to live in the world. It didn't try to lecture you or deconstruct lore. But the source argues that this HBO show is the ultimate test of the Hollywood.
Because it started off so promising.
Right. It was originally announced as a faithful adaptation. That was the explicit promise from Warner. J.K. Rowling was announced as an executive producer. They pitched a decade-long commitment to exploring the books, but then the pattern started.
Enter the new creative. And specifically, we need to talk about a writer named Andy.
Yes, this is where we get into the major red flags the source identified. They highlight a very specific comment from Andy Greenwald, who is one of the writers hired for the new show.
Now, usually if you get hired to write for a property as big as Potter, your public stance is, I am studying the text like it's a sacred religious document.
Right. Tell everyone you are memorizing the spell lists and the family.
But according to the source, Greenwald stated the exact opposite on a podcast.
He did. He said he does not like the idea of a rigorous adaptation, and... this is the real kicker. He allegedly admitted he has not actually read the books.
Wait, hold on. Let me get this straight. A lead writer for the Harry Potter television show has not read the Harry Potter book.
That is the claim the source is making based on his comments, yes.
How is that even structurally possible in a functional industry? That's like hiring a head mechanic who has never once looked under the hood of a car, or a surgeon who just decided to skip anatomy class entirely.
It is completely baffling to the average listener, I agree. But the source argues it actually fits perfectly into that Hollywood cycle we just discussed.
Because Because they want a blank slate.
Exactly. Why hire someone who hasn't read the material? Because you actively don't want someone who is beholden to that material. If your ultimate goal is to change the story, if you want to subvert it for a modern audience, the absolute last thing you want in the writer's room is a purist who keeps raising their hand saying, actually, in chapter 12 of Goblet of Fire, it explicitly says this happened.
You want someone who is flexible, someone who thinks they can improve the original author's vision.
Right. It's that arrogance. The idea that we, the modern Hollywood writers, can do it better than the billionaire author who created it. The source speculates that Warner Bros., and specifically this creative team, doesn't want to give fans, they want to give fans what they think they.
That sounds exactly like a parent telling a child to eat their vegetable. We know you really want the candy, but we're going to force feed you this broccoli because we know it's good for you.
That is a great analogy. And the broccoli in this specific case is modern social identity politics and narrative deconstruct. The source points heavily to the Wheel of Time on Amazon as the closest precedent.
What happened there?
The showrunner for Wheel of Time famously changed very fundamental aspects of the world building and the magic system to make the show more inclusive by modern real-world standards. And in doing so, fans argue he completely broke the internal logic of the universe, Robert. The source fears Potter is heading for that exact.
And that brings us, inevitably, to the most explosive part of the source's entire argument, the casting rumor. We really have to talk about the situation surrounding Severus Snape.
This is undoubtedly the centerpiece of the Nerdrotic. Now, we need to put a massive disclaimer here. These are rumors. Yeah. HBO has absolutely not confirmed it.
Right, this is industry chatter.
But the source treats it as a near certainty based on their internal. The rumor is that British actor Papa Essidou is being actively courted and cast as Severus.
Now, obviously, for those who don't know, Papa Essidou is a black actor. In the books, Snape is described very specific. Sallow-skinned, greasy black hair, hooked nose. Very specifically not that.
Correct. The physical description is completely different.
But, okay, I have to push back here again just to explore all sides. We are talking about a fantasy world with dragons, moving staircases, and polyjuice potions. Does it really truly matter if Severus Snape has a different skin tone than the book description? Papa Essidou is a genuinely fantastic actor. I saw him in I May Destroy You. He is incredible on screen. If he can capture the dark, brooding spirit of Snape, why is this the hill the source is choosing to die on? It feels like nitpicking, or frankly, worse than nitpicking to some people.
I completely understand that reaction, and if this were a completely different type of story, I might actually agree with you. If you change the race of a character in, say, a Fast and Furious movie, nobody really cares. Acting is acting, and the best person gets the job. But the source argues that within the very specific narrative architecture of the wizarding world, this specific change breaks the foundation of the story. It's not about biology or diversity quotas. It's about the underlying class metaphor and the narrative structure route.
Okay, explain that. How does changing his skin color actively break the story structure?
You have to think about the absolute core conflict of Snape's entire life. It all revolves around the chapter called Snape's Worst Memory in Order of
the memory Harry sees in the pen.
Exactly. This is the emotional pivot point of the entire 7-book saga. In that memory, you have James Potter and Sirius. In the book, who are they?
They're the cool kids. They're popular. They come from incredibly rich, old money wizard families. They're purebloods, and they are extremely arrogant.
Right. They sit at the very top of the Hogwarts social hierarchy. And who is Snape in that day?
He's the complete outcast. He's desperately poor. He lives in Spinner's End, which is explicitly written as a rundown, depressed industrial slum. He wears ill-fitting secondhand clothes. He's constantly referred to as a greasy git.
Exactly. It is a classic universal class dynamic. The rich, highly privileged, popular bullies relentlessly picking on the poor, neglected, weird kid. That is specifically why the reader feels sympathy for Snape in that moment, even though we know he is a cruel villain to Harry later on.
It grounds him.
Now, the source argues, look what happens if you swap the races based on this current cast. You have James Potter and Sirius Black, who, given the dynamics of the Black family and the lore, are almost certainly going to be depicted as white or at least lighter-skinned, incredibly wealthy characters.
Okay.
And you have them relentlessly physically tormenting, humiliating, and essentially stripping a poor, marginalized Black child in front of the whole school.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, that, just strictly visually speaking, that completely changes the dynamic. It changes it from a story about universal schoolyard bullying and classism into a racially motivated hate crime.
Wow.
The source argues that in our current cultural climate, you simply cannot show a group of rich, privileged white kids physically attacking and humiliating a marginalized black kid without immediately invoking intense real-world racial trauma for the modern audience.
It becomes incredibly heavy. It stops being about Gryffindor versus Slytherin rivalry, and it immediately starts being about modern race relations and systemic oppression in the UK.
Exact. The source argues that by introducing these heavy real-world racial dynamics into that specific scene, the entire wizarding class allegory that Rowling spent books building back, the audience stops seeing Potter versus Snape, and they instantly start seeing oppressor versus victim.
And that creates a massive narrative problem for Lily Potter's character, doesn't it?
A huge one. Lily is the moral heart of this entire backstory. The entire tragedy of Snape's life relies on Lily trying to step in and defend him from James. But Snape's pride is so wounded that he lashes out at her and calls her a mud.
Which destroys their friendship forever.
Right. And then eventually Lily grows up and actively chooses to marry James, the bully.
But if the visual dynamic has changed the way the source suggests.
Think about the optic. If Snape is a marginalized black kid who is deeply in love with her and she quote-unquote friend zones him, only to turn around and date the rich white bully who has been racially abusing him for years.
That makes Lily look really, really bad to a modern audience.
The source argues it completely destroys her character's moral standing. It heavily implies she chose the racist oppressor over the marginalized victim. Furthermore, it makes James Potter entirely irredeemable as a character.
Because you can eventually forgive a high school bully who matures and fights in a war.
Exactly, but it's much, much harder for a modern television audience to forgive a character who participates in what looks identical to targeted racial abuse.
It completely muddies the water of the morality.
It doesn't just muddy it. The source argues it actively poisons the well. And it also drastically affects Snape's eventual character arc and how the writers will have to handle.
Because Snape is supposed to be a complex asshole. He's not a nice guy in the books. He's bitter. He's incredibly cruel to Harry. He's petty. He favors his own house blatantly. He bullies Neville Longbottom so severely that Neville's literal greatest fear, his boggart, turns into Snape. That is not the behavior of a nice, misunderstood guy.
Precisely. But the source fears that the HBO showrunner, knowing the absolute optical nightmare they have created with this casting, will be forced to soften his character's significance.
Why?
Because they will be terrified of the online backlash of depicting a black character as a villainous, petty, child-hating teacher.
So they might make him nicer just to avoid falling into the angry black man trope.
Exactly. It's a very real concern for modern showrunners. But if you make Snape nicer, if you smooth out all his rough edges, you completely ruin his redemption arc.
Because his redemption only works because he was so awful to begin with.
Right. The Powers story is that he was a genuinely bad person who chose the right side at the very end, solely because of his enduring love for. If he is just depicted as a misunderstood, noble victim of systemic race, very first, all that character nuance just evaporates. He becomes a flat martyr, not a complex, morally gray anti-hero.
It really is a domino effect. You change one tile, in this case the casting, to meet a modern diversity standard, and the whole intricate mural Rowling painted just collapsed. The relationships, the core motivations, the audience sympathies, it all aggressively shifts in ways they probably aren't intended.
That is exactly the source's pattern recognition at work. They argue this casting isn't being done as an artistic choice to serve the story. It's a classic case of identity over authenticity. They are prioritizing the outward appearance of diverse structural integrity story they are adapting.
And practically speaking, the source asks a pretty brutal capitalistic question regarding merch.
Yes, and we can never forget that in Hollywood, merch is king.
It's where the real money is.
The source asks, who sells more action figures? A faithful adaptation of the character. The source suggests an Adam Driver, someone who actually physically looks like the original book illustration, or this fundamentally altered version.
Well, the hardcore fans, the ones spending real money, they want the book.
And those are the exact people buying the $300 replica wand and the expensive house robes at the theme park. The source argues that by actively creating this unnecessary controversy, Warner Bros. Is alienating the very demographic that sustains the multi-billion-dollar economy of the wizarding world.
Now, you mentioned J.K. Rowling earlier. She is famously very, very protective of her work. Or at least she used to be. She has final approval rights on almost everything, doesn't she? Is she actually signing off on these massive changes?
That is what the source calls the J.K. Rowling variable, and it is currently shrouded in mystery and contradiction. It's basically a Schrodinger's Rowling.
What do you mean by that?
Well, on one hand, you have the official corporate line. HBO executives like Casey Bloys have come out stating she is fairly involved and will absolutely have opinion.
And the CEO of Warner Bros. Discovery, David Zaslav, has been very vocal about her.
Right. Publicly, he is saying things like, we're with Joe, she's the boss. They desperately need their shareholders in the market to believe the original creator is fully on board to protect the stock price.
Because if the creator walks away or publicly denounces the show on Twitter, the fans will instantly revolt.
Precise. It'd be a PR disaster. But then, look at the actual talent they are allegedly courting for the show. The source cites the recent rumors about actor John Lithgow.
The rumor is he's being considered for Dumbledore.
That's the heavy industry word right now. And in a recent public interview, Lithgow reportedly contradicted the CEO entirely. He said, she's not involved in this production at all.
Wow, that is a direct public contradiction of the head of the network.
It is. And Lithgow went even further than that. He called Rowling's personal views on transgender issues ironic and inexplicable, even while praising her literary work.
Which is a very deliberate needle to thread.
The source actually accuses Lithgow of what they call kissing the alphabet, basically publicly signaling his political allegiance to modern Hollywood standards just to ensure he stays employable in the current climate.
So if Lithgow is right, and she's actually not involved day to day,
then the protective shield is completely gone. The source argues that if Rowling isn't sitting in those production meetings to say, no, Snake looks like this, or no, the magic system specifically works like that, then the new showrunners have complete free reign.
Free reign to do what?
To inject whatever modern messaging and lore changes they want without any pushback from the creator.
But why would she ever allow that? She's a billionaire. She owns the IP. She doesn't need the money from HBO.
The source offers a few potential theories on that. One is that her quote-unquote involvement is just a contractual formality, a consulting credit where she gets a massive check but no actual veto power over the final script.
Right.
Or even darker, the source suggests she might have actually bent the knee.
Capitulated. Surrendered her control. That doesn't sound at all like the woman who regularly writes 5,000-word essays defending her controversial positions on Twitter, regardless of the immense public backs.
It really doesn't fit her public persona. But the pressure from a conglomerate like Warner Bros. Meant. The source argues that to get literally any major project made in modern Hollywood right now, you have to play by these specific diversity and inclusion. Maybe she traded creative just to get the green light for the series.
Or maybe she's just tired. Maybe she just doesn't care as much about the adaptations as the hardcore fans do anymore.
That would be a genuinely heartbreaking twist for the fan. To feel abandoned by the creator who built the world they love.
Either way, the source clearly sees her potential lack of involvement, or even just her silence on these major casting rumors, as an absolute disaster for the show's authenticity.
Without it.
It really feels like we are setting up for a massive cultural battle between what fans desperately want to see and what the studio thinks they should have, because the showrunners have publicly promised to, quote, explore more than the movies did.
That sounds really good on paper, doesn't it? The books are huge. The movies had to cut a ton of stuff out just for runtime. I mean, I personally want to finally see the Death Day party.
It sounds great in theory, yes. And the source actually goes out of their way to list the things fans actually want to see restored. It's a really solid list.
What's on it?
Well, they want Peeves the Poltergeist, obviously, who was a huge part of the daily life at Hogwarts and was cut from the films entirely. They want Winky the house elf.
Justice for Wink. Her story is so tragic, and it's actually completely critical to the mystery of the Goblet of Fire. The movies just skipped over Barty Crouch Holbeck. Exact. Fans also want to see St. Mungo's Hospital. They want to see the tragedy of Neville Longbottom's parents, Frank and Al.
That scene in Order of the Phoenix is arguably the most emotional moment in the entire series, and it was never even touched.
They want SPEW, Hermione's Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare.
Which is such a big deal for Hermione's arc. It showed that she could be incredibly annoying and overly righteous, even when she was morally right. The movies just smoothed her out and made her practically perfect.
Exactly. Fans want the deep, dark lore. They want the history of the Gaunt family. They want the complete, terrifying backstory of Tom Riddle. All those pensive memories that Dumbledore collected that actually explain why Voldemort is...
Instead of just making him a generic snake guy.
Right. But the source's major fear is that when the current crop of showrunners say they want to explore more, they absolutely do not mean restoring those cuts.
What do they mean now?
They mean adding entirely new, completely original material that was never...
modern.
Exact. The source fears these new additions won't be about expanding the magic, but will serve as delivery mechanisms for the mess. And the source gets into some really interesting, somewhat satirical speculation here about the slippery slope of these kinds.
Give me an example.
Okay, going back to the casting ideology. If you hypothetically cast Sirius Black as a black actor, simply because his last name is Black.
Which is a bit on the nose, honestly.
Right. But if you do that, does the whole Black family become a Black family on screen?
Oh, wow. I didn't think of the implication.
Think about it. If the Black family, Bellatrix Lestrange, Narcissa Malfoy, Regulus Black, if they are all cast with Black actors, and they are simultaneously the primary villains and the most extreme blood purist story.
That sends a wildly confusing, completely backwards message.
Yeah.
You'd have a marginalized real-world demographic playing a fantasy equivalent of eugenicist aristocrats.
Exactly. The source is using this extreme example to highlight how incredibly fast the internal logic fantasy world breaks down when you start arbitrarily swapping things out based on real-world identity politics rather than sticking to the established lore.
You paint yourself into these massive narrative corners where you accidentally imply horrible things you definitely didn't mean to.
It's that domino effect. You pull one single thread to make a modern political statement, and the entire tapestry of the world building just unravels.
And that leads us to the source's ultimate conclusion. They actually compare this troubled Potter production to another big HBO project coming up, right? A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, the new Game of Thrones spin-off.
Yes, and they point to that show as the right way to.
Why does that one get a pass?
According to the source, you look at that production and everything is aligning perfectly. George R.R. Martin is heavily actively involved in the process. The casting is incredibly faithful to the novellas. Dunk looks exactly like the giant Dunk is described as. Egg looks exactly like the bald little egg.
There are no modern identity swaps just for the sake of it.
Exactly. It looks like the book literally just came to life on the screen.
And the fans are genuinely excited for that one. There's no massive backlash campaign.
The source predicts that Game of Thrones show will be a massive, universally praised hit simply because it fundamentally respects the source material. It's a simple formula. Just give the people what they already love.
Whereas for Harry Potter,
the prediction there is pretty grim. The source believes the Harry Potter TV show might actually open with massive record-breaking numbers.
Because the curiosity factor will be off the charts.
Right. Everyone is going to tune in for episode 1. They want to see the Hogwarts Express. They want to hear the music. They want to see the new castle design. But ultimately, the source predicts it will quickly devolve into a giant global disaster, or at best, a pop culture battleground, very similar to what happened with Star Wars: The Last Jedi.
Man, that is a really heavy comparison. The Last Jedi basically split the Star Wars fan base violently in half. It's been years, and people are still making angry videos fighting about it online.
And the source sees the exact same cultural fragmentation happening here. You will end up with all these warring factions. You'll have the people who hate J.K. Rowling for her real-world politics boycotting it. You'll have the hardcore purists who hate the show for changing the book lore. You'll have the people fighting endlessly about the race-swapped casting.
And then there'll be the normal people who just wanted to sit down and watch a fun wizard show with their kids. And they are just going to be completely confused and exhausted by all the yelling.
Exactly. It won't be a shared community experience anymore. It will just be a toxic war zone.
And when it inevitably fails, if the ratings drop off a cliff halfway through season 1.
The source says the studio will absolutely revert to their standard playbook. They will blame the fans.
Of course.
They will issue statements saying the fans are toxic or bigoted or just stuck in the past and unable to accept change. You'll see dozens of think pieces and articles written about why Harry Potter fans are the real problem with modern.
But the source's final verdict pushes back on that entirely.
Yeah, the source concludes very clearly. The failure of this show won't be the fans' fault. It will be the direct fault of a Hollywood system that is currently obsessed with superficial identity at the absolute expense of narrative authenticity.
So after going through all of this, what does this actually mean for us? For the average viewer sitting at home who just really wants to see the Great Hall and the floating candles again?
It means we are likely heading directly into a cultural storm. We are watching a massive high-stakes battle between two entirely different philosophies of entertainment. On one side, you have faithful adaptation. On the other, modern reinterpretation.
And one relies on trusting the strength of the original story to still resonate, while the other relies on the hubris of believing the original story is somehow broken and desperately needs fixing by modern writers.
Precisely. And as we've seen with so many other legacy franchises, fixing it usually just means breaking it beyond repair for the very people who loved it in the first. If you buy a beautiful old house specifically because you love the historic architecture, you don't then hire a contractor who openly hates the foundation to come in and remodel.
It's a genuinely fascinating, if somewhat depressing, look at the current state of the entertainment industry. The source, Nerdrotic, is very clearly waving a giant red warning flag here. They are essentially saying, don't get your hopes up, don't let them bait you and hurt you again.
And more importantly, recognize the pattern. Before you let yourself get hyped up about the first teaser trailer, take a step back and ask yourself, does this promotional tour look like step 3, or are we already in step 4?
Well, we will certainly be watching very closely to see if that first casting announcement or trailer proves the source right or wrong. But here is a final, provocative thought to leave you with today. The source heavily suggests that if this billion-dollar show failed, the studios will immediately blame you, the fan, for not being open-minded.
They always.
But ask yourself this. In a cultural landscape where authenticity is the absolute currency of fandom, is quote-unquote fixing a beloved story ever actually an improvement? Or is it really just a way for modern creators to aggressively rewrite the past, simply to make themselves feel better about the present?
That is the million-dollar question.
Keep your eyes on the horizon, folks.
Yes.
And maybe keep your original worn-out paperback books close by, just in case. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
See you next time.